Hey kiddos! Today we're going to finish up chapter 6 of The Mouse and the Motorcycle and move on to chapter 7 as well. So when we left off, Keith is going downstairs to breakfast and he's going to bring Ralph back a peanut butter sandwich. Ralph's mom does not like the sound of that idea. So let's get started. Sure enough, Keith came to the knothole. Psst, he whispered. Here it is. The waitress thought I was crazy, ordering a peanut butter sandwich along with my cornflakes for breakfast, but here it is. He stuffed half a sandwich, a bit at a time, into the hole while Ralph seized the pieces and pulled them all the way through. Listen, we're going to be gone most of the day. The dining room is packing us a picnic lunch, and we're going to drive along some of the back roads and visit some old mining towns. Thanks a lot, managed Ralph, with his mouth watering. Have fun! See you tonight, said Keith. Have a good day's sleep. Ralph's mother could not help being impressed by the sight of the peanut butter sandwich. Just like room service, she marveled. Why, it's a peanut butter and jelly, and it even has butter in it. I told you he'd bring it. Ralph could not help boasting, even though his mouth was full. Boasting is just another word for bragging, boys and girls. After sharing his feast with his squeaky little brothers and sisters, all of whom had trouble with peanut butter sticking to their teeth, Ralph curled up on a heap of shredded Kleenex and took a good long nap. When he awoke refreshed, his first thought was of the motorcycle. He wondered if Keith really had remembered to leave it under the bed. He yawned and stretched and left by way of the knothole. Room 215 was just as Ralph had last seen it. The bed had not been made, and there were no fresh towels by the wash basin. Ralph ducked under the sheets and blankets and had tumbled off one side of the bed, and there in the dim light he caught the gleam of chromium exhaust pipes. Keith had trusted him after all. He walked across the carpet and took hold of the hand grips once more. They felt just right under his paws, and he longed to be off, speeding around the threadbare spots on the carpet. But a promise was a promise. Keith had kept his promise about the peanut butter sandwich. Ralph would keep his about not riding the motorcycle in the daytime. He tried to satisfy himself by walking around the motorcycle in the dim light under the bed, admiring all over again the sleek design of the machine. Ralph was not lost in admiration and daydreams of speed and power when suddenly the door opened and the maid entered. It was too late to make a dash for the mouse hole. The maid stripped the blankets and sheets from the bed, shedding unwelcome light on Ralph and the motorcycle. Her feet in white sneakers moved lightly as she gathered up the sheets and pillowcases and towels and dropped them with a soft plop beside the open door. The next thing Ralph knew, he was hearing a familiar, dreaded footstep coming down the hall, steps he had learned to fear when he was a tiny mouse. It was the head housekeeper, the woman who was in charge of all the maids in the hotel. He recognized her footsteps, and he recognized her shoes, stout, sensible, black Oxfords. Nothing was ever clean enough for the head housekeeper, and Ralph's whole family lived in dread lest she discover their mouse hole. Now he held his breath, hoping she would go down the hall, but no. She stepped into room 215. Morning, Marjorie, the housekeeper spoke crisply to the maid. Be sure you clean 215 and 216 very thoroughly this morning. There has been a complaint from the guests. They suspect mice. Yes, ma'am, said the maid. Look behind all the drawers, continued the housekeeper, and in the corners of the closets. Please report any evidence of mice. And be sure you vacuum under the beds. You have been getting careless lately. With that, she walked briskly down the hall. Old grouch, muttered the maid as she reached into the hall for something that produced a sound that struck terror into Ralph's heart. It was the clang of a bathroom vacuum cleaner attachments clinging together. All right, so Chapter 7 is called Dun Dun Dun, the Vacuum Cleaner. From the position under the bed, Ralph watched the tank of the vacuum cleaner being dragged in the hall and listened to the clash and clang of the attachments as the maid connected a long metal tube to the nozzle at the end of the hose and fastened a carpet cleaning part to the end of the tube. He heard her humming to herself as she plugged in the deadly machine and began to work it back and forth across the carpet. It's nice she's so happy, thought Ralph bitterly, as he watched the hungry machine devour dust and lint that lay in its path. The maid's feet in white sneakers moved across the room until, without bothering to bend down to see where she was cleaning, she shoved the attachment under the bed. It slid closer and closer to Ralph. To be on the safe side, he pushed the motorcycle farther from the reach of the machine. But he dared not take his eyes off the attachment for even an instant. He shuddered as he watched it gobble a dust mouse. But even as he shuddered, he was fascinated by the power of the motor. The maid began to sing, "I'll give you a paper of pins, for that's the way my love begins." The attachment fell off the end of the long tube, but the maid, whose thoughts were elsewhere, did not notice. Now Ralph could feel the machine suck in his breath, as he knew he was in danger of being inhaled along with the dust mice. Recklessly, the maid pushed the open end of the tube back and forth any old way. There was no guessing which way it would go next. Ralph had to run with the motorcycle to avoid that terrifying hole at the end of the tube. He ran to the right, he ran to the left, and still the maid pushed the tube around, unaware that the attachment had fallen off. Suddenly, the maid threw down the tube, but did not turn off the motor. The tube landed with a bump and a bounce, and before Ralph realized what was happening, that awful machine had inhaled his tail, and he felt himself being pulled by suction across the carpet. "Help!" He could not keep from squeaking, but no one heard him above the roar of the machine. He just managed to catch the rear wheel of the motorcycle as he was sucked along the carpet. He hung on with all his strength. The machine, which was strong enough to suck up a mouse, was not strong enough to suck up a mouse and a motorcycle. Ralph lay there on his stomach, hanging for dear life, and feeling his whiskers and fur swept back toward the machine. From his position on his stomach, Ralph could see the girl standing in front of the dresser. She was smiling at herself in the mirror and arranging her hair, dreaming, no doubt, about the busboy. Ralph despaired. There was no telling how long she would stand there in that silly way, with the vacuum cleaner motor making so much noise. The housekeeper was sure to think she was busy working. Ralph felt his paws beginning to slip. He did not know how much longer he could hold out against the machine. He had to think of something and think of it fast. With every bit of strength he left in his body, he clung to the wheels of the motorcycle and his left paw while he moved his right paw up to the exhaust pipe. If he could just manage to pull himself along until he could get on the motorcycle. Bit by bit, hand over hand, Ralph dragged himself along the exhaust pipe. He knew he was making progress when he could see part of the tail once more. He reached back and yanked his tail out of the tube, only to have sucked it in again. Ralph was far from being out of danger. "I'll give you the keys to my heart," the maid sang to herself before the mirror, now pulling her hair between her ears, now piling it on top of her head, oblivious to the desperate struggle under the bed. Once Ralph's paw slipped from the exhaust pipe, and he thought he was a goner, until he caught the rear wheel in time to save himself. Slowly, he moved forward until the entire tail was free. Things were easier when he could brace his hind foot against the spokes of the rear wheel. Slowly, he rose, clinging to the machine, until he was able to grasp the hand grips and throw his leg over the seat. Ralph felt considerably safer sitting on the motorcycle and very much pleased with himself for having outwitted the vacuum cleaner. He was quite sure by now that the maid would never bother to look under the bed. He tried to move forward, propelling the cycle with his feet, but he found the suction of the motor behind him was too strong. This made him wonder if the motor on Keith's cycle was stronger than the pull of the machine behind him. The more Ralph thought about it, the more important it seemed to him to find out. No, I won't. Yes, I will, Ralph argued with himself. He promised not to ride in the daytime. Yes, but Keith did not know he would have a chance to see which was stronger, the motorcycle or the vacuum cleaner. Keith would be interested, wouldn't he? Wouldn't any boy riding the motorcycle? Wouldn't they be reckless? It would be an important experiment. Motorcycle versus vacuum cleaner. Which would be the winner? Ralph had to find out. The maid turned abruptly from the mirror. Her feet in sneakers moved across the floor toward the electric outlet. If she disconnected the vacuum cleaner, there would be no experiment. If Ralph was going to pit one motor against the other, he had to do it now. He would never have another chance. Ralph picked up his tail and started the motor. Without taking time to let it warm up, he gunned it with all the breath he could inhale. The motorcycle got off to a faster start than Ralph expected. So fast that Ralph lost control. He shot from under the bed just as the vacuum cleaner died with a long, drawn-out groan. Suddenly everything went white, and Ralph found himself bumping along in a strange, ghostly place, all white and made of cloth, that seemed to be closing in on him from every direction. Ralph had ridden straight into a pillowcase. Thrown on the heap of laundry, the maid dropped on the floor, and opening the pillowcase, had fallen shut behind him. Ralph had no idea which way was out. He dismounted from the motorcycle and beat at the cloth with his fists, but everywhere he struck, it was soft and yielding. He stamped his feet only to have the cloth give softly and silently beneath him. He began to wade through the pillowcases, tugging the motorcycle along behind him. While he wondered why he hadn't thought it so important to test the motorcycle against the vacuum cleaner, the light filtered through unknown layers of the cloth was dim, and he sank to his knees in bed linen with every step. When he came to a seam, he knew he had been wading in the wrong direction. "Drat!" muttered Ralph. He turned, still dragging the motorcycle, and tried to retrace his footsteps, only to find he had no idea which way he had come. There were no landmarks. The clouds of cloth were white, billowy, and yielding in all directions. Double drat! He stamped his foot, only to find himself sinking deeper into the linen. From the swishing sounds he could hear outside, Ralph knew the maid must be unfolding sheets over the bed. He plodded on, dragging the motorcycle without direction, with very little hope. "He promised to buy me a bunch of blue ribbons," sang the maid, "to tie up my bonny brown hair." Down the hall a door opened. Ralph heard a muffled woof, and in a moment the click of a small dog's toenails on the bare floor at the edge of the hall carpet, followed by sniffling that was dangerously close. The little terrier began to bark. "I know you're there," he yipped. "Stick out your tongue and waggle your fingers at me, will ya? Will you just wait?" Paws began to scrape at the sheets and pillowcases as if the dog were trying to dig a hole. Ralph decided it was wiser not to talk back to the dog. He huddled, scarcely breathing, against the motorcycle. "Well, hello, you cute little thing," said the maid, revealing to Ralph that she was even sillier than he had thought. As if there was anything cute about a terrier that could scarcely see through his own hair. The dog went on yapping a bit self-consciously. Ralph thought now that he knew he was being admired by the maid. A man's steps came thumping down the hall. "Stop your racket, you pesky mutt," said the owner's voice, and Ralph knew where the bark suddenly came from above him and that the dog had been snatched up. "Let me down and I'll dig him out," yapped the dog as he carried him away. "Just let me down for a minute and I'll show you." Suddenly Ralph felt himself being tumbled about in the pillowcase. He did not even have to think what to do. Automatically, he grabbed for the motorcycle and held on with all his strength. Even though he had been tipped upside down with his feet in the air, Ralph knew he was being lifted up inside the bundle of bed linen and carried down the hall. He lay still in his front paws, locked around the front rail of the motorcycle, waiting to see what would happen next. The maid walked a short distance to what Ralph judged to be the linen room, and there she dumped her armload of bedding before she went off to clean another room. All right, so Ralph is in a predicament, isn't he, boys and girls? Find out what happens next week to this mouse. All right, I'll see you later.